the third daughter of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg. Cecilia was born at Tatoi Palace near Athens on 22nd June 1911. Baptised on 10th July, her godparents were King George V of the United Kingdom, Ernest Louis, Grand Duke of Hesse, Prince Nicholas of Greece and Denmark, and Grand Duchess Vera Konstantinovna of Russia. Considered by her maternal grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness of Milford Haven, as the prettiest of the four daughters of Andrew and Alice, Cecilia made her debut in the United Kingdom during the summer of 1928. Aged 17, she took part in her first ball at the Earl and Countess of Ellesmere's Bridgewater House before attending the Cows Week and then being invited by King George V to stay a few days in Balmoral, Scotland. Although her two elder sisters were still single, and the relative poverty of her parents was not unrelated to this situation, Cecilia's family did not give up on finding a good match for her. Now Princess of Sweden, her Aunt Louise was planning to betroth her to Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark, but the plan did not succeed. It was finally from Germany that a suitor for the young girl arrived. Since her childhood, Cecilia had in fact been in contact with her cousins, Princes Georg Donatus and Louis of Hesse, whom she first met in 1919, while she was living in exile in Switzerland. The relationship between the princess and Georg Donatus turned into a romance during the year 1929, and the two were unofficially engaged in early 1930. At that time, Cecilia was just 18 years old, and Georg Donatus, the pretender to the throne of Hesse, was 23. With her sister Sophie having become engaged almost at the same time as her to another member of the House of Hesse, Prince Christoph of Hesse, Cecilia made the preparations for her wedding in the company of her younger sister, aged 16. The two princesses thus went to London in the spring of 1930 in order to obtain new clothes. Shortly after, they returned to Paris to put together their trousseau and buy their wedding dresses. The nuptials of Sophie and Christoph were celebrated at Schloss Hotel Kronberg in Kronberg im Taunusson, 15th of December 1930. The wedding of Cecilia and Georg Donatus took place at the Neue Palais in Darmstadt on 2nd February 1931. To the surprise of the foreign guests, who expected a much colder welcome from a population that had dethroned Grand Duke Ernest Louis in 1918, the wedding aroused the enthusiasm of the people, who gathered in droves to attend the event and cheer their former princely family. The couple were married in a double religious ceremony, both Orthodox and Lutheran. The ceremony brought together some 50 guests from all over Europe, but took place in the absence of the bride's mother, Princess Alice, who was still hospitalized in Switzerland. Prince Christoph of Hesse, Cecilia's brother-in-law, joined the Nazi Party in 1931 and the SS in 1932. For their part, the princes of Hesse kept their distance from the far-right party for a long time because the Grand Duke Ernest Louis had no sympathy for the Führer's ideas. However, things changed in May 1937. On that date, Georg Donatus and Louis, the two sons of the former sovereign, joined the Nazi Party. Following the example of her husband and her brother-in-law, Cecilia joined the party at the same time. Cecilia and her family went to Frankfurt on 16th November 1937 to get on board a plane of the Belgian company Sabena, which was to take them to London via a stopover in Ostend, where it was planned to pick up 2 other passengers. The small group, which consisted of Cecilia, 8 months pregnant, Georg Donatus, their 2 sons Ludwig, aged 6, and Alexander, aged 4, and the Dowager Grand Duchess Eleanor, was accompanied by Baron Joachim von Riedessel and Alice Hahn. According to Philip Eade, Cecilia hated taking the plane, and she always dressed in black when she made a trip like this. The journey started under normal weather conditions, but a thick fog developed as the plane approached the North Sea. Despite the poor visibility, the pilot followed the flight plan and attempted to land at Ostenstein Airport. However, during the manoeuvre, the aircraft struck the chimney of a factory, causing the destruction of a wing and an engine of the aircraft. It then crashed against the roof of a building before being thrown several meters away and catching fire. The accident caused the immediate death of all passengers, including a newborn baby whom Cecilia seemed to have given birth to in the middle of the flight. Prince Philip, then 16, was particularly close to Cecile and described being called into his headmaster's study at Gordonstown to be told of her death as one of the worst moments of his life. Years later, he wrote, "I have the very clearest recollection of the profound shock with which I heard the news of the crash and the death of my sister and her family." The funeral of Cecilia and her family took place in Darmstadt on 23rd of November, 1937. The event gave rise to a mass gathering, but also served as a pretext for a large deployment of soldiers in Nazi uniform. Photos from their funeral shows Prince Philip flanked by grieving relatives, all wearing distinctive Nazi uniforms. One is clad in the uniform of the brown shirts, another wears full SS regalia. The fourth of 5 children of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg, Sophie spent a happy childhood. In 1927, Sophie met one of her distant cousins, Prince Philip of Hesse-Kassel. Shortly after, she met 2 of his brothers, the twins Christoph and Richard of Hesse-Kassel, at the manor of Hemmelmark, the home of her great-aunt Princess Irene of Hesse and by Rhine. Despite her being 13 years their junior, the 2 German princes soon attempted to court her, and it was Christoph who managed to grab her attention. Their romance eventually ended in an engagement which was officially celebrated when Sophie turned 16 in 1930. The nuptials of Sophie and Christoph were celebrated in Kronberg im Taunus on 15th of December 1930. They were married in 2 religious ceremonies, with the Orthodox one held at Friedrichshof Castle and the Lutheran one at a church in the city. With their honeymoon over, Sophie and Christoph moved into an apartment in Berlin's Schöneberg quarter. After working for a long time in the Maybach car factory in Friedrichshafen, the prince had just been hired as a broker by the Victoria Insurance Company. In October 1930, Prince August Wilhelm of Prussia, son of Kaiser Wilhelm, introduced his cousin Christoph to the politician Hermann Göring, and it did not take long for the 2 to form a closer relationship. Under the influence of Göring, the prince and his wife then met Adolf Hitler, who deceived them with his charm and his apparent modesty. Under these conditions, Christoph joined the Nazi Party, first secretly in 1931 and then publicly in 1933. He also joined the SS in February 1932. However, in his family, Christoph was not an exceptional case. His older brother Philip had become a member of the Nazi Party in 1930. Subsequently, their respective twins, Princes Wolfgang and Richard of Hesse-Kassel, joined the party in 1932. Finally, their parents, Frederick Charles, Landgrave of Hesse, and Princess Margaret, followed the example of their sons in May 1938. Unlike her sisters Cecilia and Margarita, who joined the Nazi Party at the same time as their husbands in 1937, Sophie never became a member of the Nazi Party. Like her sisters-in-law, Princess Mafalda and Princess Marie Alexandra, she nevertheless joined the National Socialist Women's League in 1938. In fact, Sophie had long shown enthusiasm for Nazi Germany. Linked to the elite of the Hitler regime, the princess thus maintained friendly relations with Emmy Sonnemann and was one of the guests of honour at the time of her marriage in April 1935 to Hermann Göring, who notably had Adolf Hitler as a witness. From a financial point of view, the coming to power of Adolf Hitler significantly improved the situation of Christoph and Sophie. In 1933, the prince was appointed personal advisor to State Secretary to the Prussian State Ministry Paul Körner. 2 years later, Göring placed Christoph in charge of the Forschungsamt, an intelligence service responsible for spying on the telecommunications of Nazi Germany. At the same time as these events, Sophie and Christoph's family grew larger with the successive births of Christina, Dorothea, Karl, and Rainer of Hesse. The birth of their eldest son, was also an opportunity for the couple to underline their support for Nazism, since the child received, among his names, that of Adolf, in tribute to the Adolf Hitler. As a means of protection, Christoph warned Sophie about the need to beware of prying ears and never to speak politics with people other than her sisters and cousins. Even though he probably moved away from the SS from 1934, the prince nonetheless remained a staunch supporter of the Nazi regime. On 7th October 1943, Prince Christoph died under mysterious circumstances during a plane crash in the Apennine Mountains near Forli. A few weeks later, in November 1943, the princess and her mother-in-law received a visit from Obergruppenführer Siegfried Taubert, commissioned by Heinrich Himmler to discreetly spy on the family. Aware of their vulnerability, the two women then refrained from expressing doubts about the conditions surrounding Christoph's death. Widowed since October 1943 and mother to 5 children, Sophie got close to Prince George William of Hanover, son of Ernest Augustus, Duke of Brunswick, and brother of Frederica, Queen of the Hellenes. Their romance ended in an engagement, which was celebrated in January 1946. As her wedding was scheduled for April, Sophie was trying to convince the American authorities to allow her to use the jewellery she left in Friedrichshof and wished to wear during the ceremony. Having obtained the necessary permit, the princess and Landgravine Margarita went to the castle, where they thought they would find the jewellery that Prince Wolfgang hid in the cellar in 1943. To their dismay, however, the two women realised that the jewels had been stolen, and an investigation was soon opened to find out what happened to them. It was then established that on 5th of November 1945, Captain Kathleen Nash, Major David Watson, and Colonel Jack Durant had discovered the jewels, whose value was estimated at £2 million at the time, and that they eventually stole them in February 1946, brought to justice. The 3 American soldiers were found guilty, but only some of the stolen pieces were found intact, the rest having been dismantled to be more easily sold in Switzerland. In addition, the American government procrastinated for several years around the question of the return of the remaining pieces, which were not given back to their owners until 1st August 1951. In the end, the family recovered around 10% of the stolen jewellery. Under these conditions, the marriage of Sophie and George William took on a simpler form than expected. Organised at Salem Castle, property of Berthold, Margrave of Baden, husband of Sophie's sister Theodora, the event was the occasion for the bride to reunite with her brother Prince Philip, whom she had not seen since 1937, and who came to Germany with his arms laden with food and gifts. With George William having completed his law studies at the University of Göttingen in 1948, he was approached by his brother-in-law, Berthold, Margrave of Baden, to take over the management of the Salem Castle School, which had since been closed due to the Second World War. Once in Salem, George William and Sophie settled in a large house provided by the Margrave of Baden, and the children of the princess were educated in the institution run by George William. In fact, the financial situation of Sophie and her husband remained precarious for a long time. For the princess, however, things gradually improved from 1950, when she received a small inheritance from her maternal grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness of Milford Haven. The princess spent the last months of her life in a nursing home in Schleswig, where she died on 24 November 2001, and was survived by her husband, 7 children, 14 grandchildren, and 14 great-grandchildren. Her funeral was held at Wolfsgarten Castle, in the presence of many members of the aristocracy, and her remains were buried at the cemetery of St. Martin's Church in Schleswig, where she was eventually joined by her second husband in 2006. The eldest daughter of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, and Princess Alice of Battenberg, Margarita spent a happy childhood between Athens and Corfu. In her youth, however, she witnessed the Balkan Wars, followed by the First World War and the Greco-Turkish War. For the young princess and her relatives, These conflicts had dramatic consequences and led to their exile in Switzerland, then in France, and the United Kingdom. During their exile, Margarita and her family depended on the generosity of their foreign relatives, in particular Princess George of Greece and Denmark, who offered them accommodation in Saint-Cloud, and Lady Louis Mountbatten, who supported them financially. In 1930, Margarita was 25 when she met Gottfried, Friedel, hereditary prince of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, who, like her, descended from Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. Coming from the House of Hohenlohe, whose states were publicised at the beginning of the 19th century, the prince was heir to a fortune made up of castles, farmland and forests. Margarita and Gottfried fell in love and married on 20th April 1931. Organised at Langenburg Castle, their wedding consisted of a double religious ceremony, both Lutheran and Orthodox. Occasion was a large family reunion, at which Margarita's mother Alice was not present. Among the many guests were the Dowager Queen Marie of Romania and Grand Duchess Victoria Feodorovna of Russia, aunts of the groom, as well as Prince George of Greece and Denmark and Louise, Crown Princess of Sweden, uncle and aunt of the bride. Once their marriage was celebrated, Margarita and Gottfried settled at Weikersheim Castle, located not far from the town of Langenburg. After a stillbirth in 1933, Margarita gave birth to 3 children, Kraft, Beatrix and Georg Andreas. Concerned about her mother's fate, Margarita visited her several times in Kreuzlingen, and their reunion was often filled with emotions. However, Alice was angry with those close to her for having her placed in an asylum and, once released from there in 1933, she made known her desire to stay away from her family. 4 years passed before she put an end to her voluntary exile. The reconciliation of the princess and her children finally happened in 1937, and Margarita saw her mother for the first time in July. When she was not taking care of those close to her, Margarita was involved in charitable works, which soon earned her the admiration of the inhabitants of the former principality of Hohenlohe-Langenburg. Like several members of her entourage, Margarita joined the Nazi Party on 1st May 1937, at the same time as her husband. Thereafter, the couple used their family connections to promote the rapprochement of the Nazi regime in the United Kingdom. Enlisted in the Wehrmacht, Gottfried participated in the Anschluss in 1938. The outbreak of the Second World War greatly affected Margarita, whose family found themselves divided by the conflict. While her husband and brothers-in-law, Prince Christoph of Hesse and Berthold, Margrave of Baden, joined the German ranks, her brother Philip fought in the British Royal Navy. The defeat of Germany and its occupation by the Allies brought new upheavals in the life of the former German princely families. When the war ended, Margarita and her family found themselves in the American-occupied part of Germany, so their lives were not under threat. After peace was restored, the revelation of the war crimes of the Wehrmacht and their role in the Holocaust, brought to light during the Nuremberg trials, had serious repercussions on the relationship between the Hohenlohe-Langenburgs and their foreign relatives. For his part, Prince Philip found himself unable to invite his sisters on the occasion of his marriage to Princess Elizabeth of the United Kingdom because of anti-German sentiment prevailing in Great Britain after the war. Aware of the difficulties their brother had to face, Margarita, Theodora and Sophie considered their sidelining wrong and hurtful. They felt snubbed when they realised that their cousins, the Queen Mother of the Romanians and the Duchess of Aosta, had been invited despite their countries being allies of the Nazi regime during the conflict. In March 1948, Margarita and her 3 elder children were invited to Athens by Princess Alice, who offered them the trip thanks to the pension that the Countess Mountbatten of Burma continued to pay her. Invited to stay at the royal palace by King Paul and Queen Frederica, Margarita was delighted to be back in her home country. The Greek royal family was not the only royal house to show its desire to reconnect with the Hohenlohe-Langenburgs. In 1950, Margarita was allowed to return to the United Kingdom on the occasion of the funeral of her grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness of Milford Haven. A few months later, the princess was chosen to be one of the godmothers of her niece, Princess Anne. Above all, in 1953, Margarita, her sisters, their husbands and some of their children were invited to the coronation of Elizabeth II. Satisfied not to have been sidelined once again, the Princess of Hohenlohe-Langenburg nonetheless noted with sadness the anguish of her brother Philip, who considered with apprehension his new status as Prince Consort. Margarita died on 24 April 1981 in a clinic in Bad Wiessee, Bavaria, 6 days after her 76th birthday. Attended by her brother, the Duke of Edinburgh, her funeral took place in Langenburg, where she was buried alongside her husband, the second of 5 children of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg. Theodora spent a happy childhood between Athens and Corfu. In June 1931, Theodora became engaged to Berthold, Margrave of Baden, son of the last Chancellor of the German Empire and titular Grand Duke of Baden. From November 1929, Berthold was in charge of a substantial fortune. A man of culture, he lived in Salem, where his father had founded a school with the help of his secretary, Kurt Hahn, in 1920. On 17th of August 1931, Theodora and Berthold married in a double religious ceremony, both Lutheran and Orthodox, at the Neues Schloss in Baden-Baden, which resulted in a large family reunion, at which the bride's mother, Princess Alice, was not present. After the ceremony, the newlyweds went on their honeymoon in Capri, Italy. Back in Germany, the couple moved to Salem Castle, a former Cistercian abbey transformed into a princely residence after its secularization in 1803. The Margrave and Margravine of Baden had 3 children. Margarita Maximilian and Ludwig concerned about her mother's fate. Theodora visited her several times in Kreuzlingen, but Alice did not always receive her daughter warmly. Aware that her brother had been living a chaotic existence since their mother's placement in a sanatorium, Theodora got Philip to go to school in Salem and to come and live with her and her husband in 1933. The rise of Nazism in Germany, however, led her to reverse her decision and send him back to the United Kingdom, where he finally enrolled in Gordonstown in 1934. While several of their relatives, such as Cecilia and Margarita, Theodora's sisters, as well as Marie Alexandra, Berthold's sister, gradually joined the Nazi Party, the Margrave and Margravine of Baden tried to keep their distance from the Nazi regime. The war brought its share of tragedies for Theodora and her relatives. In October 1943, her sister Sophie's husband died in a plane crash while flying over the Apennine Mountains. A few months later, in January 1944, Marie Alexandra, Berthold's only sister, died in an attack by the US Army Air Forces during an air raid on Frankfurt am Main. Finally, in December 1944, her father, Prince Andrew, died in Monaco without having been able to see his children again. These events greatly affected Theodora, who then went through a period of depression. At the end of the 1940s, Theodora began to suffer from heart problems. Over time, her health deteriorated, and she appeared very diminished at the wedding of Prince Juan Carlos and Princess Sofia in 1962. Her health then alternated between times when she had the greatest difficulty speaking or walking and times when she felt absolutely good. Unable to anticipate her next seizures, she had to move around with a cane at all times. Forced to have all her teeth pulled out, she acquired a strange smile, which her mother struggled to get used to. As his wife's health deteriorated, Berthold suffered a fatal heart attack while driving with their son Ludwig on 27 October 1963. Upset by the demise of her husband, Theodora then hurriedly returned from Italy, where she was on vacation. Theodora's last years were affected by the establishment of the regime of the colonels in Greece and by the departure into exile of King Constantine II and his family. Hospitalized at the clinic of Dr. Budingen in Constance, Theodora died on 16 October 1969,